Hi, everyone. Professor Sackett-Taylor here. This is a video lecture covering the content from Chapter 1 in Principles of Macroeconomics. This chapter is called 5 Foundations of Economics. So the big questions that we're seeking to answer in this chapter are, what is economics? And what are the 5 foundations? Economics is traditionally split into 2 subcategories, macroeconomics and microeconomics. Both of those subcategories share the same 5 foundations of economic decision-making. They are incentives, trade-offs, opportunity cost, marginal thinking, and trade. So, question for you. When you hear the word economics, what words come to mind? My bet is that at least half of you thought money or finance. And while those are some topics that we cover when we study economics, economics as a discipline is much, much broader than that. In general, you can think of economics as the study of how individuals and the societies they belong in allocate their limited resources to satisfy practically unlimited wants. In other words, how do we get the things that we need and want to the people who need and want them? Economics is a social science, and it's essentially a study of human behavior. So, this idea that we have unlimited wants but limited resources leads us to one of our first major concepts, scarcity. Scarcity is the inherently limited nature of society's resources, given that we have unlimited wants and needs. So it's basically saying we want more and we need more than we are actually able to produce and consume. Economics, therefore, seeks to answer how individuals and their collective societies are going to make decisions about this allocation. How do we allocate, or how do we spread out these scarce resources between people, between regions, and over time? So what could be said about scarcity? Well, here, out of these answers, the first one is correct. Scarcity forces us to make choices, because often when we are allocating a scarce resource, it can only go towards one want or one need, or potentially one person or one region, or it can only be used at one point in time. And so this leads us to making trade-offs. In microeconomics, we study the individual units that make up the economy. The focus is on individuals, businesses, and industries. So some questions we might be seeking to answer using a microeconomic lens would be, how does a rise in sales tax impact the retail industry? On the other hand, macroeconomics is a study of the overall aspects of the workings of an economy. It's a big picture focus. So through a macroeconomic lens, we might ask questions more like, is the economy of Japan in a recession? You'll study both microeconomics and macroeconomics, and it doesn't matter which order you do it in. However, both subcategories of economics, micro and macro, deal with the same 5 principles of decision-making. These are incentives, trade-offs, opportunity costs, marginal thinking, and trade. Let's start with incentives. An incentive is a factor that motivates you to act or to exert some kind of effort. Incentives affect how people respond. So for example, in order to incentivize you to do a particular job, you may be paid using money or potentially paid in other ways. I've definitely had jobs where I was paid in food, and I was okay with that. Incentives matter, but they can be either positive or negative. Positive incentives encourage action, usually by offering a reward or a payment. So for example, if I want to get you to participate in class, I may offer extra credit for your participation. It's a positive reward because it incentivizes you to do something. Negative incentives, however, discourage action. And usually they do this by providing an undesirable consequence or even a punishment. For example, we have many laws in our country against stealing, and you could even go to jail or be fined for stealing something from a store. These are negative incentives because they discourage you from doing a particular action. Incentives can also be direct or indirect. A direct incentive is something where I've communicated very clearly to you, here's the thing that I want you to do, and here's what I'm going to do in order to get you to do that other thing. It's really easy to recognize. So for example, you might think of the kid who gets a gift if they get straight A's. The parents communicate to the child, I want you to get straight A's. If you do that thing, I will reward you with a gift. Indirect incentives are harder to recognize. An indirect incentive will create a secondary change in behavior brought on by the original incentive. So let's say that the original incentive is that you want to keep all A's, but there's not a direct reward involved. So you may actually cheat on a test in order to achieve that goal because you are incentivized to get all A's by the prospect of reward. Unfortunately, we often will incorporate incentives into policies that have unintended consequences. In other words, an unplanned result. It's usually negative and unwanted. So for example, a policymaker has to figure out how to balance both the benefits that are brought on by a policy with any potential unwanted consequences. Something we've seen recently. The government may want to provide higher unemployment compensation for a number of reasons, right? And those reasons often are led by wanting to create the greatest benefit to society and create protections for those who are most vulnerable. However, an unintended consequence of this is that because the unemployment compensation is higher, we may see individuals staying on unemployment longer than they otherwise would, which leads to higher unemployment statistics, an unintended consequence. And so we have to balance out which is bigger, the benefit of the incentive, the goal that we were trying to reach, or the consequence that is not very favorable. So which of the following situations illustrates an incentive? Here, the answer is C. Lee gives his children candy if they behave during dinner. This is a direct positive incentive. Lee communicates to them the action they want them to take and then tells them what the reward will be if the action is taken. The second foundation is the concept of trade-offs. Since resources are scarce or limited, people sometimes have to choose something over another thing. Oftentimes, this means that you will not have all the time, resources, and energy that you want to do that you want for everything. And therefore, every decision incurs a cost. In other words, by choosing one thing over another, that thing that you chose incurred a cost, meaning you had to give up something in order to do it or achieve it or have it. So, for example, a governor decides to increase funding for education. However, funding is a limited resource. So in order to increase funding for education, it means that there had to be decreased funding for something else, in this case, infrastructure. This is a situation that illustrates a trade-off. Since we're talking about the cost of making trade-offs, we can name this concept. This concept is called opportunity cost. It's essentially the value of the thing that you had to give up, or it's the highest value alternative that had to be sacrificed. So it's basically used in our decision making as a way to make the best possible decision by choosing the option that minimizes what you have to give up, minimizes the opportunity cost. So here's a thought experiment. What is the opportunity cost of going to college? In other words, what is it that you're giving up? Or what is the highest valued alternative to going to college? Well, in this case, you may think about things to include an opportunity cost, including tuition, books, and time. But you don't want to include things such as food and housing because you're not giving up alternatives. To put it in the easier way, I like to think of the opportunity cost of college as what would you be doing if you weren't going to college? Sometimes the answer to this is you would be working. And so what you're giving up are the wages that you would earn in that next best alternative, that job that you would have instead. That is an opportunity cost of attending college. Or perhaps by attending college, you had to move far away from home. And so you have less time to spend with your family and your friends and your loved ones. That's an opportunity cost, which brings me to the point here that opportunity cost does not have to be measured in dollars. Opportunity cost is measured in whatever it is you give up, whether it's giving up time, energy, relationships. It could even be like an emotional sacrifice. We'll talk more about this throughout the semester. So the opportunity cost of buying something is the value of the next best alternative that you could have purchased. So if you weren't able or you weren't willing to buy a particular thing, the opportunity cost of that purchase would be the next best option. What is it that you would have bought instead? This brings us to our third foundation, which is marginal thinking. Economic thinking is a purposeful way of evaluating all of our available opportunities in order to make the best decision possible for us. This requires what we call marginal thinking. Marginal thinking means that you are evaluating the benefit and the cost of each individual unit of a decision. So it's essentially like taking a really big decision and breaking it down into its smallest parts. So for example, instead of thinking about like, oh, do I want to go to college for 8 semesters or not at all? Maybe you take that decision semester by semester and you ask yourself, okay, what is the benefit of 1 semester's worth of college? And what is the cost of 1 semester's worth of college? Therefore, I make the decision on the margin, right? Just that one little tiny unit of a much bigger decision. So the marginal benefit is going to be what additional benefit you derive from that single small unit of your decision. And the marginal cost will be all the additional cost, both in monetary terms and just in opportunity cost. What is it that you've given up by incurring that extra unit of whatever your decision is? So I gave you the college example. You might also think about pizza. So you're not going to sit here and think, oh, I either want to eat a whole pizza pie or none at all. You take it slice by slice, right? You say, all right, what is the benefit to me of eating 1 slice of pizza? And what is the cost? Then eat it or don't eat it. Then if you ate it, you ask, okay, what is the benefit to me of having a second slice? What is the cost? What is the benefit to me of having a third slice? What is the cost? And that way you break a big decision, eating a whole pizza, down into smaller decisions, slices. And so the margin becomes the slice decision or the semester decision, breaking a big decision down into small component pieces. So with regards to marginal thinking, an individual will go forward with an action only if the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost. In other words, what you gain from that small incremental decision has to be better or greater than what you give up, right? We do this all the time unconsciously, and now we're just giving it a name. This is marginal thinking, assessing marginal benefit versus marginal cost. The next foundation in all of economics is that through trade, we create value. And by trade, we mean the voluntary exchange of goods and services between two or more people or parties. Trade like this creates value. This is because without trade, we would have to be purely independent and produce everything that we wanted to consume. Now, I don't know about you, but there are a lot of things that I am not very capable or not very good at producing. I specifically think about services. For example, I don't know enough about auto mechanics to fix my own car. I certainly don't know enough to grow all of my own food. I would be like pretty limited to zucchini and cucumbers and tomatoes. But this is the idea of like, if I want to consume something, most of the things I want to consume, I'm going to rely on other people to produce for me. Trade fosters this exchange and then promotes specialization. So what that means is that I realize that there are some things, some production methods that I'm better at than others, right? And it's an efficiency measure. It's a measure of what can I produce using the fewest resources, whether that resource be time or actual physical inputs. And so for me, I've figured out that I should specialize in teaching, that when I think about the use of my time and energy, it is best used in a way that I am sharing that knowledge with others because of the skills and the assets that I bring to it. So I would say that I have comparative advantage in teaching. Comparative advantage is just a situation in which an individual, a business, or a country can produce an output, a physical good, or perhaps a service at a lower opportunity cost than their competitors, meaning I can produce this thing and give up less of other things. So, for example, I can produce my teaching and still have time and energy left for other things that I love to do and other things that I need to do. But if I had to spend my time fixing cars and actually make those cars work, I would probably have very little time and energy left for anything else because I'm not very good at it and I don't have the tools and skills needed to produce that service efficiently. So through comparative advantage and specialization, markets facilitate trade. A market is just a place, whether it be physical or now it can exist on the World Wide Web, that bring buyers and sellers together to exchange goods and services, right? So like your friendly local grocery market, Stop and Shop, is a market, but so is Craigslist and eBay, even though they're not physical spaces. It's just a place where some people are going seeking something. I want or need a product or a service. And there are other people who show up saying, I am able to produce that product or service. And if people are specializing in the thing that they have comparative advantage in, meaning they specialize in producing the thing that they have to give up the least amount of other stuff to do, then we create value because we're all saving time and energy from doing things we're not very good at or things we don't really like and spending more of our time and energy producing the things that we love to produce and that we're good at producing for others who can't do it as well. This leads us to our first model in this class. This is the circular flow diagram. It shows how goods, services, and resources, the inputs for goods and services, flow through our economy. So we essentially have two actors, households and firms. Let's first talk about how households and firms interact in the product market or the market for goods and services. These are things that you can like buy and sell on a shelf or like on Craigslist, right? So in this case, households are the ones who come to a goods and service market and want to buy things, right? Like I want to buy a hairdryer and I want to buy milk and I want to buy the service of someone mowing my lawn, right? And so in this case, in the product market, households are buyers, which makes firms the seller. And so the firm is going to sell goods and services to the household through the product market. On the other end of this, how are those products made? Well, they take inputs, right? And these inputs include labor, land, other physical materials, space, and those things are provided by individuals, the households. So for example, when I go to work at Westfield State University is the firm, and I am the household, and I am providing an input, a resource, my labor, my time and energy to Westfield State in order for them to create the service that you are now consuming. And it goes round and round and round. So households provide resources to firms. Firms use those resources to create and make end products and services. And then they provide those products and services back to households in the product market. And the money goes in the opposite direction. So when households provide their labor, what do we get in return? We get wages. When firms sell a product or a service, what do they get in return? Money or payment. So this is how the circular flow diagram works. It relies on households and firms to be both buyers and sellers in these two complementary markets. The other thing about the circular flow diagram is that we now use money, particularly to avoid the situation of having to barter. Barter meaning that I would provide a good or service in exchange for another good or service. But what that requires is what's called a double coincidence of wants. I actually have to find the person who wants what I have and who has what I want. And that's really inconvenient now, given the number of people living on this earth. And so we've eliminated that need for a double coincidence of wants by using money, because I can now go and pay someone for something, and I don't have to have something that they also need in return, right? I just have the money that is the value of the thing that they're providing me, and vice versa. So in conclusion, economics is a study of human behavior. It's how we make decisions about allocating the limited resources that we have to satisfy nearly unlimited wants and needs. Whether we are studying microeconomics or macroeconomics, we still are served by the same 5 foundations. The first is incentives. Positive and negative incentives change how people behave by giving rewards for behaviors we want to see or punishments for behaviors we don't want to see. We all face trade-offs. Because our resources are limited, we often have to make a choice to do or have one thing or another, but not both. This leads to us to recognizing that there is a cost associated with this trade-off that we call opportunity cost. Every time we make a decision, it's usually because something had to be given up, and the value of what we gave up or the value of the next best alternative is the opportunity cost of that decision. In order to make the best decisions we possibly can, as economists and as economically minded people, we use marginal thinking. That means we take really big decisions and we break them down into their smaller component parts. We then evaluate each unit, each component, based on its marginal benefit and its marginal cost. And we only ever proceed with a decision if the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost. Finally, trade creates value. Through all of this, we use markets to facilitate the exchange of goods and services by specializing in the thing that we are best able to produce, which means we want to specialize in the thing that we have comparative advantage in, the thing that I can produce while giving up the least amount of other stuff. So it's all about efficiency. And through that efficiency, we create value by interacting in markets to get our needs met and allocate the resources in the best way that we can. So that's chapter 1. There's a lot of information in here. I would suggest that you go back through this video and pause where you want to and take additional notes. Pay special attention to the words highlighted in red because those are key concepts that we'll want to revisit and we'll see coming up in future chapters. This is a great time to make note of any questions you may have for me when I see you in class and we talk about this topic. Or you might want to summarize everything you've learned in this lecture by creating a study guide and bringing it with you to class to fill in the blanks, fill in the spots where maybe you could use a little bit deeper of understanding. All right, so that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video.